The common view is that fear is definitely problematic in our lives and can be extremely sabotaging to positive life goals and personal relationships and just having a good life overall. Fear is recognized as an obstacle, as a problem, but also in that common view is the belief that fear is sometimes beneficial, that it actually does have some redeeming qualities. And because of those supposed redeeming qualities, we shouldn't reject it altogether. We should consider it our sometimes friend, most of the time enemy, but sometimes friend. And those sometimes friend attributes or modes of friendliness, however is best to word it, the three pro fear ideas, let's say that, are number one, that fear is a survival mechanism, right? So that's good. It helps you survive, supposedly. And I'll get into, I'll analyze each in turn, but the second pro fear idea is that it's a motivator. You know, thank you, fear, for motivating me. Okay, that's number two. And number three is that it helps us focus, it helps us stay alert, particularly alert to dangers. So, those are the top three pro fear ideas I hear. Whenever anybody is rationalizing fear or whenever they're speaking positively about it, um, it appears to always be one of those three ideas that supposedly redeems fear from being labeled completely toxic or even demonic. So I'm going to question each of these in turn, like I said, and analyze them, and I believe debunk them. But before I do that, it's again important to zoom out and make sure you're not holding on to a meta view of life that includes moral relativism or moral nihilism, wherein you're against the idea of anything being completely bad. Because if you're holding on to that idea, it doesn't really matter how good my debunking is. You're just going to basically ignore it because you are holding a belief that in general nothing like emotions, certain emotions, that they can't possibly be all bad. That they must have some redeeming quality. Um, and this could be an appeal to nature, right? If it exists in the natural world, including our bodies, our minds, then it must have some purpose, or it must have some good quality. That's an appeal to nature, an assumption that just because something exists in our reality, that it's good or somewhat good. Um, Also, there's definitely the appeal to authority, which is what a lot of people follow, which is just, well, this is what everyone teaches about fear and stress. They even have all these, you know, made up terms like eustress and so on, talking about how it's this good form of stress. And so there's a lot of supposed, expertise coming our way, uh, speaking very authoritatively on fear, and how can they all be wrong? Well, you're just assuming that they're right. Why assume that they're right? So-called authorities are oftentimes wrong. It doesn't make sense to assume just because they have some title or that they're speaking authoritatively, speaking confidently, that they're right. Um, and also, from a theological perspective, it doesn't make any sense to just disregard the possibility that there's things in this world that are completely bad and they're there for us to reject. Like, that's part of the reason why we're here on Earth, why humans are on Earth, is to conquer these evils, right? To purify our minds, purify our thoughts and our actions, right? That's a common theme in various religions and, even philosophy, self-improvement, psychology, spirituality, right? A common theme of like overcoming negative thinking and negative emotions, right? So it's like there's a majority of people realizing like it's good to do this improvement, to recognize our mistaken thinking and actions, but only to a certain extent, and never pinpointing, for the most part, never pinpointing particular emotion thoughts that should be considered 100% toxic and best never clung to, never followed, ever, in any scenario. So I believe fear is one of those toxic emotions. Yes, it does, you could say, occur naturally. Yes, it's not something to, like, quote unquote suppress. It's just something to not follow. If my argument is, whenever fear arises in your mind, the best thing to do is not cling to it, not follow it in all scenarios, especially dangerous scenarios. Okay, so, and I'll just add one more, uh, a couple more points on the religious front. So, in the book of Revelation, Jesus gives a list of kinds of people that will be outside the gates of salvation, you could say. And the very first type of person he puts on the top of the list is cowards. I think that's overlooked by Christians quite a bit. Second point on fear. I mean, a lot could be talked about fear in a Christian context, but I'll just give one more point, which is in one of John's letters, the Apostle John, he talks about how there's no fear in love. In other words, they're completely incompatible. You can't be fearful and loving at the same time. Okay, well, the greatest commandments of Jesus are to love God, love others, and love ourselves, right? Commandments of comprehensive love. So if fear and love are incompatible, how could you possibly follow the commandments if you're being fearful? Right? Logically, you couldn't. Okay, well, I'll leave it there as far as the theology goes and, Christianity on fear. And go right into the number one pro-fear idea of it's a survival mechanism. So I've talked about this many times before, but in case this is your first time hearing me talk about fear, this is simply a false equivalency with the body's crisis response. When the body is faced with an immediate danger, we are blessed with this crisis response, this automatic crisis response that increases our agility and strength to respond to that crisis, whether it's a dangerous animal approaching us, or, say you're walking in a big store and a box above you starts, falling towards you. You're going to have this immediate response of the body that is actually very beneficial. But the thing to recognize there is that this is a physiological response, right? It's a physiological process, again, having to do with increased agility and speed. And another amazing part of this response is that blood flow is reduced at the skin level, so that if you're cut by whatever, say the dangerous animal, for example, you'll bleed less. So your chances of survival are better. To me, that's just another clear indicator of intelligent design, but that's another topic of discussion. So the main point here being it's a physiological response. It's not an emotion thought. So you need to recognize that fear are particular stressful thoughts, right? A thought with stress is not the same thing as this automatic crisis response that increases agility, speed, and survivability. Okay, that they're not equivalent, but we're told that they are, right? We're basically fed this big lie that the emotion thoughts of fear, various emotion thoughts of fears, there's three main fears of fear of humiliation, fear of failure or social failure, and fear of injury, that these particular emotion thoughts are somehow equivalent with the survival mechanism, the true survival mechanism, which is this automatic physiological process of the body, or this response of the body. Fear of injury is not the same thing as a bodily response. Okay, they're not equivalent. So that is the main blunder, that is the main mistaken perception on fear that leads people to believe that fear is sometimes valuable. You might say, well, wait a minute, fear of injury, that sounds like it could help you. It doesn't actually. If you analyze the actual experience of having thoughts of fear of injury, what you find is stress and either a lie, an assumption, or an immoral thought. For example, I'll start with the immoral thought. That is one of the forms of fear of injury, which is you are fearful of someone, you're intimidated by someone because of your own immoral view of that person, right? So, say someone is racist, right? And so, someone who just has a different body type, different skin color, they then become fearful of that person. They then become intimidated by that person because of their own immoral view of that person, which is a slanderous assumption, a slanderous view of that person as being dangerous, even though, they're not doing anything dangerous, whatever. They could just be walking down the street, but people are going to act fearful. That's actually immoral. That's an immoral form of intimidation, right? So that's not a survival mechanism. That's just immorality in action, following that, what I'd say is, demonic emotion thought. The other form of fear of intimidation is an assumption. Excuse me, fear of injury is an assumption, which is where you just assume something is dangerous when it's really not. So how is that beneficial? If you're constantly assuming things are dangerous when there's no reason to rationally believe that, that's not a survival mechanism. That's a recipe for, being potentially, stressed and anxious and having your life constrained by fear constantly, right? You could assume just about anything is dangerous, right? And people have various phobias, right? These are not beneficial. People assuming things are dangerous is not actually a survival mechanism, right? And then the final form of fear of injury, which is based on a lie, is again the lie that it's actually beneficial in a dangerous situation, which it's not, because stress reduces your awareness and your critical thinking. And those are two faculties that are especially valuable in a dangerous situation. If you're confronted by a wild animal and it's growling at you, say a tiger in the jungle, yes, that's a very dangerous situation, but having your awareness lowered and having your critical thinking lowered is going to lessen your chances of survival. It's the opposite of a survival mechanism. It's sabotage. It makes it worse. So if you cling to fear in a dangerous situation, if someone or some animal is attacking you and you get fearful, you're actually less able to deal with that danger. And, people experienced in martial arts, for example, know this very well. None of them are recommending you become extremely fearful during a fight. That's not actually beneficial. You want to stay relaxed in your mind so that you can, maintain situational awareness, maintain your critical thinking on what the best response is, right? Even in, other scenarios, like you're on a plane, they tell you, stay calm, look around, the exit might be right behind you. If you get fearful and panic, you might not realize that the exit door was right behind you, or you might hurt others and, start pushing people and stampeding and making things worse for yourself and others, right? It's not beneficial in an emergency, in a dangerous scenario. It's just a lie. If you think about it, as I'm explaining here, you can recognize that. And this has not been explained to us because fear is so disempowering, and having a disempowered, fearful populace actually serves, you could say, the powers that be, right? But again, that's another topic of conversation. So I'll continue here with the second top pro fear idea, which is that it's a motivator. I've heard people say this a bunch of times. Oh, if like they'll say, oh, if you have a paper due, or you have a deadline at work and you're afraid that you won't meet the deadline, well, that's good. That fear is helping you, right? It's motivating you to get the job done, right? So that seems kind of legit, right? But it's not actually true. Again, it's a false equivalency. To say that fear equals motivation, that's just by itself false, right? Would you say that if you look up the word motivation, in a thesaurus, a synonym is not fear, right? They're not actually synonymous. You can be, for example, motivated by love, right? When a mother loves her child, right? She's motivated to care for the child, right? That's not fear-based, right? Or let's go back to the work or school scenario. You can be motivated to do well at your job or at school because you want to be successful and that's your goal, right? The idea that motivation requires fear is just false. And to think that it's an ideal motivator, again, doesn't make any sense, for the same reason that fear, uh, being a survival mechanism, doesn't make any sense, because fear is inherently stressful. That it's a stressful emotion thought. So if you're trying to complete a task, right? That's what motivation is about. Motivate to do something, right? To do something well, right? Well, how does lowering your awareness and critical thinking help you do anything well? It doesn't. Again, awareness and critical thinking are extremely valuable faculties, whether it's in a dangerous scenario or whether you're just trying to do well at something, get a good job done. In either case, awareness and critical thinking are going to be helpful for that, and fear undermines both awareness and critical thinking. So therefore, it doesn't serve motivation, just like it doesn't serve survival. So it's just false. Okay, top three, the number three of the top three pro fear ideas is that it helps you focus. I've heard people and I've read um, in books on fear or articles on fear, people giving this exception to fear, saying, well, it is good sometimes because it helps you stay alert, particularly alert to danger. People say it helps you avoid danger sometimes. I had someone say that directly to me in response to one of my talks on fear or one of my comments on fear. They said, well, it helps you stay away from danger sometimes. So, it's good. It's good in that way. So this is a little different than the survival mechanism, although I guess you could put it under the same label. But the idea is that basically it increases your situational awareness, right? Like if you're kind of fearful when you're walking through that dark alley at night, well, that's actually good because you're going to be more alert to a possible danger, right? So the falsehood here, the flawed thinking here is that you can't have situational awareness without fear, right? Like you can't just logically think like, well, this is a potentially dangerous situation, so I'm just going to keep my head on a swivel. I'm going to, stay alert, make sure I can hear. I'm not going to wear my headphones so I can't hear anything. I'm going to stay aware and alert and make sure I can hear and see what's going around me to the best of my ability. And you can actually choose to do that in a calm manner. Like, there's no reason why you can't choose to be, you could say wisely cautious or street smart without getting stressed. And again, this idea that it helps you focus is just false because of the same reasons that I've mentioned prior, that it stress, fear as an example of that, lowers your awareness and critical thinking. So lowering your awareness counters situational awareness. It's not compatible. You can't say, oh, fear helps me be more aware. That's not the case. When you're overcome by fear, your awareness has not increased. It decreases. Right? We even have the expression, it gives you tunnel vision, right? And when you see when people get in a panic, oftentimes they're clearly not aware of everything going around them, right? They can flip out, to an extreme extent, and they're pretty oblivious to what they're doing or what's going on around them, right? They're just overcome by this stressful emotion thought of fear. So another false equivalency to say that fearful thinking, stressful, fearful thinking is equivalent to alertness or focus. It's just false. And folks experienced in meditation who become masters of focus and alertness, like monks, Buddhist monks or monks of, Christian monks, anyone, well um, versed in meditation practice. None of these meditation masters are saying the key to meditation is fear, right? Like, no, they're not saying that because it's not true. They're not saying that the key to awareness is fear, None of them are teaching that because it's just completely false. It's just not true to reality whatsoever. So, in summary, the top three pro fear ideas of, oh, fear is a survival mechanism, or fear is a motivator, or fear helps you focus and stay situationally alert and aware, they're all false. So, what that means is that fear is completely useless, it's toxic. And we're actually, I believe, here to conquer fear, right? Again, returning to Jesus in Revelation, right? He who conquers will inherit the blessing, right? Conquers what? Conquers the enemy, and part of the enemy's tactics, I would say, or part of the enemy's manifestation is fear. Fear is the enemy. I actually have a patch that says those very words I'm looking at right now. Fear is the enemy. 100%, not 85, 90% of the time. The problem is if you think it's sometimes good, you've left the wedge in the door, right, for the devil to keep coming back, right? Courage is 100% good, right? Courage is the virtue that opposes fear. Courage is the way to go. Courage is what we need to align our minds and hearts with, not fear. So I hope you found this helpful and valuable. If so, consider picking up my guidebook on fear, which I'll link to below. All right, thanks for listening.